Black homeless veteran on trial, when judge hears his name and suddenly stands in silence. Thunder cracked overhead as the bailiff called the court to order. Everyone in the packed gallery leaned forward, sensing the tension that hung thick in the air. The defendant, clad in ragged, mismatched clothes, stood at the defense table, trembling from equal parts cold and fear. No one expected a homeless man to elicit so much attention. But the moment the judge glanced down at the case file, his expression shifted from dispassionate authority to something like stunned recognition. He rose slowly from his seat, eyes locked on the defendant's name. And in that charged silence, the entire courtroom realized. This was no ordinary trial. James Archer woke up on a damp piece of cardboard behind a dumpster in the south side of Chicago. The sky was a dreary gray, filled with swollen clouds that threatened another round of the perpetual rain that had been dogging the city that spring. His bones ached. A cold wind sliced through the alley, making the already miserable morning close to unbearable. Each breath brought the metallic scent of the city, steel, wet concrete, and the lingering stench of garbage, into his lungs. He let out a tired sigh, forcing himself upright. His tattered jacket, a dull green army surplus coat, bore a faded patch that read, Operation Enduring Freedom. It was one of the few reminders left of his time overseas, fighting in a war that had left him physically and psychologically scarred. People often dismissed him as just another homeless veteran muttering to himself in the shadows, but within his sunken eyes lay deep regrets, traumas, and once upon a time, a fierce devotion to duty. He hunched over, the cold making his arthritic joints stiff. When the rain started, its icy drops trickled down his threadbare collar. He needed to move. The day loomed before him with an unrelenting emptiness. No job, no home, no family waiting with breakfast on the table. Just the dogged pursuit of survival, finding something warm to eat, a place to dry off, and maybe a scrap of dignity left in a society that had seemingly forgotten him. Yet James refused to let go of a slender reed of hope. He clung to the memory of men in uniform. He recalled dusty roads and the camaraderie that had once been his lifeline. There was a single notion that propelled him forward, a promise to a fallen friend made many years ago in the heat of combat. James intended to keep that promise, even if it meant he had to face demons from his past. As he rummaged through the dumpster for anything salvageable, a piece of stale bread, a cardboard sheet less soggy than the one he had, an overlooked bottle for scrap refunds, his mind raced with conflicting thoughts. If he could just hold out a bit longer, maybe, somehow, his life would turn around. He looked at the tattered watch on his wrist, frozen at 2:15. It had been that way for years, but he kept wearing it like a talisman. The watch belonged to a fellow soldier who died saving James in Afghanistan. Its broken face was a constant reminder that life could stop at any moment. The least he could do was keep going, even if that meant inching through life one painful step at a time. Downtown Chicago brimmed with urgency that morning. Business people scurried with umbrellas in hand, hurrying along wet sidewalks, stepping around puddles like landmines. James drifted aimlessly through the throng, head bowed to avoid the inevitable scornful glares. On occasion, a kind soul would spare $1 or $2, but mostly he was invisible. His stomach rumbled as he passed by Manny's Cafeteria and Delicatessen, a well-known establishment on South Jefferson Street known for its famed corned beef. The tangy aroma wafted out of the sliding doors, making James's gut clench in longing. He stood outside for a moment, leaning against the building's brick exterior to shield himself from the drizzle. If he could muster a bit of courage, maybe he'd ask someone for some spare change. Yet shame kept his voice silent. He'd once been strong, courageous even, but asking for a free meal felt like a new kind of defeat. Sensing it was pointless to linger, James wandered on, turning into a narrow alley. There, a chaotic scene unfurled. A group of teenagers, looking no older than 15, had cornered a smaller boy. They shoved him against a graffiti-covered wall, rummaging in his backpack for money. James froze. Something in him stirred. an instinct from the battlefield or maybe a moral code that refused to be silenced. He shouted, "Leave him alone!" surprising even himself with the force of his voice. The teenagers turned toward him, momentarily startled by the bedraggled figure stepping out of the shadows. One of them, a boy with a black hoodie, sneered, "Mind your own business, old man." James held his ground, fists clenched. Another bully advanced, brandishing a pocket knife. James's pulse hammered in his ears. Fear flared in his chest, yet he refused to back down. He recognized that look in the teen's eyes, the arrogance of someone who felt invincible. James knew the cost of violence. He also knew that sometimes you had to stand for what was right. "Kid, you don't want to do this," James warned, trying to keep his voice steady. "It won't end well." The blade-wielding teenager lunged, aiming low. Time slowed as James instinctively sidestepped. He'd learned to fight in close quarters, but the stinging winter and his weakened body made his movement sluggish. Pain from old injuries flared as he twisted, trying to wrest the knife away. The scuffle was short but frantic. When the dust settled, the bullies fled, leaving the smaller boy cowering on the ground, tears staining his cheeks. James scooped up the backpack, handing it over gently. "Thank you," the boy whispered, eyes wide with a mix of fear and gratitude. "You all right?" James asked, his voice trembling with adrenaline. The boy nodded but kept staring at James's jacket, as if noticing the military patch. Without another word, the kid ran, leaving James alone in the alley, panting. A moment later, a siren wailed in the distance. James realized how the scene would look, an older, disheveled man at the site of a fight, a minor assault. He hardly had time to gather his thoughts before a police cruiser pulled up, headlights flooding the alley. An officer emerged, gun drawn. "Freeze! Hands up!" James complied, heart hammering. Another officer came to frisk him, grabbing the worn jacket. "There's a knife on the ground," the first officer shouted. "It's not mine," James said, voice shaking with frustration. Yet the officers seemed to have drawn their own conclusions. Moments later, James found himself cuffed in the back of the cruiser, watching his chance at a quiet day vanish. In the harsh neon glow of a Chicago precinct station, James Archer sat behind bars, the steel bench digging into his spine. The place was abuzz with activity. Other detainees yelling, drunks moaning, officers calling out for backups or reading off charges in monotone. Through the haze of fatigue and worry, James wondered how it had come to this. He tried explaining the situation repeatedly. The bullies had been the aggressors, and the knife wasn't his. Still, the police insisted they had a witness who saw James brandishing the weapon, even though James suspected that witness was either a bystander who misunderstood or one of the teens lying to shift blame. Memories of his service days played in his mind like an old movie reel, images of him patrolling in Kabul, sharing jokes with squad mates, and that final roadside ambush that had taken so many of his brothers in arms. He swallowed the lump in his throat. If only they knew. An officer approached, pressing a phone receiver against the bars. "You got one call, make it quick." James hesitated. Who could he call? He had no family. His mother had passed away years ago, and he had no siblings. His ex-wife left with their daughter when he was still overseas, and the last he heard they'd moved to New York. He had no idea how to reach them, yet one name flashed in his mind. Martin Fletcher, a fellow veteran who ran a small non-profit helping ex-soldiers get back on their feet. They'd crossed paths a few times at a soup kitchen. Martin had slipped him a card saying, "Call me if you ever need a hand." With trembling fingers, James dialed the number, each ring a countdown on his fading hope. Finally, a groggy voice answered. "Martin Fletcher speaking." James swallowed hard. "It's Archer, James Archer. Sorry to call so late." There was a moment of silence, then Martin's tone steadied. "James, what's going on?" Briefly, James explained the situation, each word laced with shame. Martin asked for the station's address. "Stay put. I'll see what I can do," Martin said, voice firm with resolve. Though James felt marginally relieved that someone believed him, or at least cared enough to listen, a dull dread sank into his gut. This was serious. There were assault charges, possibly weapons charges. Given his record of petty infractions, trespassing, loitering, he worried it might not end well. He hung up the phone and the officer pulled it away. The cold metal of the bench felt harsher than before. James rubbed his wrists, still sore from the handcuffs. He raised his eyes to the dusty ceiling, as if in silent prayer. For the first time in a long while, he prayed for mercy, not just from a judge, but from fate itself. Days later, James was escorted into the Cook County Courthouse for his hearing. It was a mammoth building, all imposing marble columns and polished floors. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, illuminating the lines of people waiting to enter different courtrooms. Lawyers in suits lugged briefcases, families huddled quietly, anxious about outcomes. James felt distinctly out of place in his ragged clothes and unshaven face. A guard led him down a corridor to courtroom 7B. The name on the door read, Honorable Judge Lawrence Marston. Martin Fletcher was already there, a folder of papers in hand. He wore a modest suit, slightly wrinkled as though he'd slept in it, and carried the aura of a man determined to fight for justice. Despite Martin's presence, James's nerves frayed. He could almost hear the stifled whispers from people in the gallery. When the bailiff announced the case, James was nudged to the defense table. Martin stood beside him, glancing at the prosecutor's side. Their official stance was that James had been caught with a weapon while assaulting minors. It sounded damning, even though it was far from the truth. Judge Marston, a tall man with gray hair combed neatly back, scanned the documents before him. He looked ordinary enough at first glance, but the lines around his eyes suggested a man who had seen far too much heartbreak from the bench. The hearing began in the usual fashion. The prosecution laid out the charges: assault with a deadly weapon, resisting arrest. James clenched his fists, feeling each accusation like a punch to the gut. Martin interjected, explaining that James had stepped in to protect a victim of bullying and that the knife belonged to the aggressors. The judge listened intently, occasionally jotting notes. Eventually he peered at the defendant. Mr. Archer, do you have anything to say for yourself? James hesitated. His throat felt like sandpaper. Your Honor, He paused, a swirl of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. I only wanted to stop those kids from hurting someone. I have no reason to carry a knife. Judge Marston nodded once and looked down at the case file again. Suddenly something seemed to catch his eye. His posture stiffened. Carefully he lifted a paper from the file. Is your full name James Jonathan Archer? The judge asked, voice lower now. Yes, Your Honor. James replied, a tremor in his words. The judge froze, eyes widening. A fleeting expression of shock and something akin to recognition crossed his face. Silence enveloped the courtroom. Even the murmuring from the gallery ceased. For a split second, Judge Marston seemed to lose his judicial composure, his face paling as though he'd seen a ghost. In one deliberate motion, Judge Marston stood, stepping away from the bench. The entire courtroom held its breath. No one expected a judge to stand during a hearing. The bailiff looked uncertain. The gallery leaned forward, anticipating something extraordinary. Judge Marston lifted his gaze to James, searching, as if verifying a memory. Slowly he removed his glasses. Mr. Archer, the judge's voice quavered. Where did you serve? James swallowed hard. Afghanistan, sir. Operation Enduring Freedom from 2009 to 2012. The judge exhaled sharply. He began, but trailed off. Then he composed himself. Bailiff, I'd like to call a short recess. Counsel, approach my chambers. The gavel hit the sound block. Shocked whispers rippled across the room. Martin glanced at James, who looked equally bewildered. The judge never explained why he'd stood so abruptly or why he'd recognized James's name. But in that charged moment, it was evident that James Archer was not just another homeless defendant. The judge's chambers were modest. Tall bookshelves lined the walls, filled with legal tomes, and the faint scent of old paper hung in the air. Judge Marston gestured for Martin, the prosecutor, and James to enter. Once the door closed, the judge turned toward James, eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and respect. "Mr. Archer, do you recall a Lieutenant Samuel Marston?" James's heart kicked into a sprint. The name rang like a distant bell, echoing from the darkest corners of his memory. Lieutenant Samuel Marston had been an officer in James's battalion, a man James had respected and admired for his unwavering courage. They'd shared more than just a uniform. They'd shared harrowing nights, mortar fire, and fleeting moments of levity in a place where hope was scarce. Yes, Your Honor," James stammered. "He was my commanding officer for a time. We lost him in an IED attack and—" The judge choked back emotion. "He was my son." A hush fell across the room. Even the prosecutor, who'd been flipping through pages, stopped to stare. Martin's hand froze over his folder. James's mouth went dry. He didn't know what to say to a father who had lost his son. Judge Marston removed his glasses and rubbed his temples. "I recognized your name from the casualty report and letters Sam used to send home. He mentioned you, his most dedicated soldier, I believe." James felt a lump forming in his throat. Hearing that his old CO had spoken well of him was like receiving a message from beyond the grave, one that reminded him of who he used to be before life had battered him down. "I'm so sorry for your loss," James managed, his voice raw. "Lieutenant Marston saved my life more than once. I owe him everything." The judge pursed his lips, fighting tears. "He wrote about you surviving that final explosion. I never knew what happened to you after." James bowed his head. "Things fell apart, sir. I got hit with an honorable discharge after I was injured. Then came bills, the nightmares, losing my family. Life just got hard." Tension thickened in the room. The judge drew a shaky breath. "This trial, these charges, they're serious, Mr. Archer, but I need to know the truth." Martin cleared his throat, stepping in. "Your Honor, we maintain that James was trying to defend a young boy from bullies. The weapon was not his. We have one witness's testimony that conflicts with the officer's statements, but we need more time to gather additional evidence or find the boy. He ran off before the police got names." The prosecutor looked conflicted, glancing between Judge Marston and James. She spoke softly. "If it's true that Mr. Archer intervened to protect someone, these charges might be reduced or dismissed, but we have to verify that." Judge Marston nodded, his face etched with a poignant mix of sadness and resolve. "I won't preside over this case due to the personal connection. I'll recuse myself. But Mr. Archer, you'll have another judge assigned. Until then, I'm granting bail. I strongly suggest you appear for your next hearing, and we will allow your counsel to present further evidence." James almost buckled from relief. He whispered his gratitude, though it felt woefully inadequate. As the prosecutor prepared documents, the judge moved closer, speaking to James in a low voice. "I couldn't save my son," he said, blinking away tears. "But maybe I can help the men he cared about. Don't give up on yourself, Mr. Archer. My son believed in you." James swallowed hard, tears pricking his eyes. No words sufficed. He nodded, heart heavy with sorrow yet buoyed by a spark of hope he hadn't felt in years. Released on bail, James stepped out of the courthouse into the drizzling rain. Martin was at his side, phone pressed to his ear, arranging for a temporary shelter. They stood on the courthouse steps for a moment, letting the damp wind wash over them. "That was intense," Martin muttered. James nodded, still reeling from the encounter. "I can't believe Judge Marston is Lieutenant Marston's father. I never knew his dad was a judge." Martin sighed. "Neither did I, but it might work in your favor. If we can prove your innocence, and I believe we can, this could be the turning point for you." James looked to the sky, raindrops tapping his face. He felt a strange mix of guilt and hope. His old commanding officer's father was now involved. Could he bear letting him down after what Sam had sacrificed? His mind flashed back to the dusty roads of Afghanistan, the scorching sun, and the day Sam had rallied them under heavy fire. He recalled the promise he'd made at Sam's makeshift memorial. "I will make my life mean something." At the time, it had felt like a vow he'd keep no matter what. Now, battered by homelessness and PTSD, that promise seemed hollow. But maybe this was a chance to reclaim it. A few minutes later, Martin finished his call. "Okay, I've got a place for you to stay. It's not luxurious, but it's better than the streets." They walked to Martin's car, a second-hand sedan with chipped paint, and drove to a small shelter operated by a veteran-focused charity. On the way, Martin laid out their plan. "We need to find that kid you helped. He's the best witness we have. Otherwise, it's your word against those teenagers and the responding officers." James stared out the car window at the passing city lights. "I don't even know his name. All I know is he's smaller, maybe in junior high." Martin frowned. "We'll do some digging. Meanwhile, stay out of trouble. Keep away from downtown. If the prosecution builds a stronger case, it'll be harder to knock down those charges." James nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes. I can't go to prison for trying to do the right thing." Under the glow of street lamps, they pulled up to a modest 3-story brick building. A banner read, "Midwest Veterans Foundation." Inside, a thin man with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes greeted them. Martin introduced him as Gordon, the shelter supervisor. "Got your room ready upstairs," Gordon said, offering James a warm handshake. "Just a bunk bed and a shared bathroom, but it's safe, and there's a hot meal waiting in the cafeteria." After filling out some forms, James climbed the creaking stairs. A wave of exhaustion hit him. The last few days had been a whirlwind of fear and anxiety, but for once he had a clean bed. Maybe he'd actually get some restful sleep. In the dim dorm-style room, James sat on the edge of the bed. He ran his fingers over the battered watch strapped to his wrist. Recalling the face of the soldier who once owned it, another friend lost in the line of duty. "I'm trying," he murmured softly, as if speaking to the ghosts of his past. "I'm really trying." Days passed in a blur as James tried to piece his life together. By day, he cleaned up around the shelter, helped serve food in the cafeteria, and attended group therapy sessions for veterans with PTSD. During these sessions, he listened to stories of men and women grappling with nightmares, guilt, and a society that seldom understood their struggles. One man in particular caught James's attention, a double amputee named Carlos, who'd lost both legs in an ambush. Despite his disability, Carlos radiated a positive energy that seemed to lift the entire group. He'd always say, "We survived for a reason, my friends. Let's not waste the chance we've been given." James tried to absorb that optimism, but guilt still gnawed at him. He kept remembering that day in the alley. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw the flash of the blade, heard the teenagers sneer, and felt the pounding adrenaline. He also remembered the terrified face of the kid he'd saved. Martin visited often, bringing updates. So far, their attempts to locate the boy were unsuccessful. None of the local schools recognized the vague description. The police refused to help because, as the prosecution argued, the alleged victim was unidentifiable. "Our best bet might be security footage," Martin explained one afternoon, flipping through notes at a cafeteria table. "I've subpoenaed the camera feeds from nearby buildings, but it's taking time." James cradled a paper cup of coffee, wishing he had something stronger. "So it's back to the waiting game?" "Pretty much," Martin replied. "Until then, the case remains in limbo. We might get a break with the camera footage, or the kid might come forward." James exhaled, frustration mounting. "If that footage doesn't show the fight clearly, or if that kid doesn't come forward, what then?" "We'll keep fighting," Martin said, voice resolute. "I'm not giving up." Outside, the sky was clear for once, sunlight glinting off the building's windows. James stared at the blue expanse, remembering how, in Afghanistan, a clear day often meant a hail of bullets. Here it was just a reminder of better possibilities. Before Martin left, he handed James a business card for a local therapist. "I suggest you talk to Dr. Newton. She specializes in trauma counseling for veterans. Could help you get your story straight for the trial, plus it's good for your mental health." James eyed the card. "I appreciate that." Martin patted James's shoulder. "We're in this together, buddy." As Martin left, James remained seated, turning the card between his fingers. Maybe therapy could help him face the nightmares. Maybe it could help him find closure on the things he couldn't change, the war, the losses, the sense of betrayal he felt upon returning home. With a weary sigh, he resolved to try. Dr. Stephanie Newton's office was tucked away in a refurbished brownstone near the Chicago River. Warm lighting and soothing artwork created a welcoming atmosphere. The faint smell of lavender diffused through the space, and a small water fountain trickled in one corner, offering a gentle background hum. James sat on a plush chair, feeling somewhat out of place in his thrift store clothes. Dr. Newton, a soft-spoken woman with a professional yet empathetic demeanor, settled in across from him. "So, James, what brings you here today?" she asked. He fidgeted, eyes drifting to a painting of a sailboat on her wall. I guess I'm trying to get my life in order, especially with this case looming over me." "Martin Fletcher told me a bit," she said. "We don't have to talk about the case if you don't want to, but it might help to discuss the circumstances around your PTSD. James nodded, picking at a loose thread on his jacket. "I've been having nightmares, flashbacks. It's like I can't get out of Afghanistan, and then when I got back everything unraveled. My marriage, my job prospects, my home. I ended up on the streets." Dr. Newton listened quietly, letting James speak without interruption. He talked about the injuries, both visible and invisible, about the guilt he felt surviving while friends like Sam Marston didn't, about the promise he'd made at Sam's grave. And now, the shock of meeting Sam's father on the bench. Tears burned the corners of his eyes. "I should have died with them," he choked, voice trembling. "The fact I'm alive, it sometimes feels like punishment, and I haven't done anything worthwhile since returning." Silence settled, broken only by the gentle fountain. Dr. Newton leaned forward, sympathy glowing in her eyes. "You're not worthless, James. The path life takes us on after war is complicated. Survivor's guilt is a heavy burden, but it doesn't define your worth." He nodded, though the words felt distant. She continued, "Regarding your case, it seems you acted out of a moral impulse to protect someone vulnerable. That suggests you still hold on to your integrity, your sense of duty. Perhaps that is something you can build upon." James wiped his eyes, the tears surprising him. "Thank you," he whispered. They spent the rest of the session discussing coping techniques for anxiety and nightmares. Dr. Newton encouraged him to keep a journal, to track his triggers, and to practice grounding exercises whenever old traumas resurfaced. By the time the session ended, James felt both drained and oddly lighter, as if he'd set down a piece of the heavy load he'd been carrying for years. Outside, he inhaled the crisp air, noticing that spring was gradually blossoming into early summer. The city, though still bustling and harsh in many ways, seemed just a bit more inviting. Time was running. The next court date loomed, and Martin's attempts to get the security footage were met with bureaucratic delays. One day, as James was helping Carlos wheel himself into the cafeteria at the shelter, Martin burst in, waving a piece of paper. "They found some footage," he announced breathlessly. James's heart leapt. "Does it show what really happened?" Martin shrugged, excitement tempered by caution. "Haven't seen it yet. They just gave me a letter stating the footage was recovered and that we can view it tomorrow at a city records office." The following day, they arrived at the facility, a sterile building that housed countless hours of surveillance tapes. A weary clerk escorted them to a small viewing room. The clerk set up a playback of the relevant date and time from a camera perched on a nearby building. On screen, James recognized the alley, though the camera angle was distant and partially obstructed by a fire escape. He saw a figure that had to be himself, stepping into view as a cluster of teenagers moved menacingly toward a smaller boy. James intervened. The scuffle ensued and then the teens fled, but the resolution was poor. The boy's face was blurred by shadows. The crucial moment of the knife attack was partially blocked by a dumpster. It did show, however, that the smaller boy was being cornered, and that James seemed to be defending him. Martin paused the video. "This is helpful, but not definitive. The prosecution can still claim you were the aggressor if they twist the narrative." They might say you approached them first. James's shoulders slumped. So we still need that kid. They asked the clerk if there were more angles, but none existed. Disappointed, they left. That evening, as James helped serve dinner at the shelter, he came across a teenage boy no older than 16, quietly eating soup in the corner. Something about the boy's posture and wary eyes seemed familiar. Curious, James approached. "Hey," he said softly. "You all right?" The boy nodded mutely, slurping soup. James noticed bruises on his arm, faint but present. A shiver of recognition prickled James's skin. The shape of this boy's face, the timid manner. Could it be the same one he'd saved? He leaned in, voice low. "I don't mean to pry, but have we met before, in an alley?" The boy's eyes shot up wide with fear. Without a word, he sprang from his seat and bolted for the door. "Wait!" James called, but the boy was gone. Later that night, James paced the dorm room, heart racing. Was that the kid? He replayed the face in his mind, convinced it was the same. But why was he here at the shelter? Did he run away from home? Was he living on the streets too? He told Martin, who insisted they search the shelter records. Yet the boy hadn't officially checked in. He must have slipped in for a quick meal. The next few days, James kept a vigilant watch, hoping the boy would return. While the search for the mystery boy continued, James found himself increasingly restless. He took late-night walks around the block, haunted by the possibility that the boy was still out there, vulnerable and alone. During one such walk, he passed a dingy underpass near the rail yard, an area where runaways and the homeless often congregated around burning barrels for warmth. He noticed a small figure curled on a broken mattress, face partially obscured by a hoodie. James approached cautiously. The smell of burning garbage and rotting food made him gag, but he pressed on. "Hey, do you need some help?" The figure jolted awake. James recognized the same bruised face that had fled the shelter's cafeteria. The boy stared at James, fear etched on his features. "You know me," James said gently. "You remember the alley, don't you? I swear I just want to help." Tears welled in the boy's eyes. "I'm sorry," he mumbled, voice quaking. "I didn't want to get you in trouble. They told the cops you pulled a knife." James knelt down, ignoring the damp, filthy ground. "Listen, I need your testimony to prove my innocence. Please. Without you, I might go to jail for something I didn't do." The boy's hands shook and he shrank back, hugging his knees. "I can't go to court. They'll know it was me who ratted them out. I'll get hurt worse. Those bullies are from my school. I'm stuck with them every day." James's heart ached. He remembered feeling powerless in a war zone, pinned down with no way out. "You can't live like this. Let me help you." The boy shook his head frantically. "No, I can't. You don't understand. My mom's boyfriend kicked me out. He was hurting me. I have nowhere else." A surge of protective rage coursed through James, mingling with compassion. "We can find you a safe place. My friend runs a shelter specifically for teens. You'll be protected." "Protected?" The boy's voice cracked. "They can't protect me at school. Those bullies will find me." James placed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. "You step forward, tell the truth, and I promise I won't let them hurt you again." A moment stretched between them, tension thick. Finally, the boy nodded, tears streaking his cheeks. James exhaled shakily. "What's your name?" "Dylan," the boy whispered. "We'll get through this, Dylan," James said, offering a small, resolute smile. Bringing Dylan back to the shelter required a delicate approach. Martin and Gordon coordinated with a local youth outreach program to provide Dylan with protection and counseling. Martin also contacted the police about the assault and the ongoing threats from the bullies. Initially, Dylan was petrified to speak publicly, but with encouragement from James, and after meeting with a child advocate, he agreed to give a statement. Meanwhile, the looming trial date was just a week away. The new judge assigned to the case was Honorable Rebecca Pruitt, known for her tough but fair approach. James worried that his story might still not be enough to sway a courtroom entrenched in stereotypes about the homeless. Dylan's official statement corroborated James's account. James had indeed rescued him from the bullies who brandished the knife. Dylan had seen James wrestle the knife away before tossing it aside. The police arrived at that critical moment, misunderstanding what had occurred. The prosecution, however, was not so quick to drop the charges. They questioned Dylan's credibility, citing his precarious living situation and insinuating that James might have manipulated the boy. "It's a nasty strategy," Martin told James grimly. "But we'll have a strong defense. With the CCTV footage plus Dylan's testimony, I like our chances." During this whirlwind of legal preparations, James kept returning to therapy, trying to stay grounded. Dr. Newton helped him process the anxiety and guilt, reminding him that he deserved a fresh start. "You're not defined by your homelessness or your trauma," she said in their final session before the trial. "You've already done the bravest thing, standing up for Dylan, despite your own hardships." James clenched his jaw. "I just wish I could do more." Dr. Newton's gentle smile was warm. "Sometimes doing what you can is enough." The day of the trial dawned clear and bright, as though nature offered a fleeting reprieve from the tensions swirling in James's mind. He dressed in donated slacks and a button-down shirt, courtesy of the shelter's resource closet. Martin straightened his collar in the courthouse hallway, offering a firm nod. "You ready?" "As I'll ever be," James replied, taking a deep, trembling breath. Courtroom 12B was even more crowded than before. Reporters had caught wind of the unusual circumstances. An ex-soldier, homeless, allegedly rescued a bullied teen while a judge with a connection to the soldier's fallen comrade recused himself. The public interest soared. Judge Pruitt entered, a stern expression on her face that instantly silenced the murmuring crowd. After the formalities, the prosecution laid out their argument, painting James as a volatile individual with a history of loitering and minor offenses, implying he escalated a confrontation with teenagers. Next, Martin methodically presented the newly acquired evidence. He showed the CCTV footage, flawed though it was, and then called Dylan to the stand. The boy's hands shook as he was sworn in. "Dylan, can you tell us what happened in that alley?" Martin prompted gently. Dylan fidgeted, shooting a quick glance at James for reassurance. "I was heading home, or trying to. Those guys followed me. I was scared. They told me to give them my money. One had a knife. Then..." He paused, tears threatening to spill. "Then Mr. Archer showed up and told them to leave me alone. He tried to take the knife from them, but the cops arrived right after. They thought he was the one attacking me." The prosecutor stood for cross-examination, pressing Dylan on details. How well he knew James, whether James had offered him money or gifts in exchange for testimony. Dylan, his voice wavering, insisted none of that was true. Finally, the prosecutor sighed and looked to the judge. No further questions. James swallowed hard. He could see some skepticism lingering in the jurors' faces, but also a flicker of sympathy. Martin then called James to testify. Carefully, James recounted his actions, his reasons, and his background as a veteran who felt compelled to protect someone weaker. He didn't delve too deeply into his homeless status, but he didn't hide it either. When the cross-examination came, the prosecution tried to paint James as desperate, possibly using heroics to cover for a robbery gone wrong. James held his ground, recalling Dr. Newton's advice. Remain calm, speak honestly, and look at the jury. "I had nothing to gain from this," he said firmly. "I'm not proud of living on the streets, but I didn't want to see another young life ruined. That's all." As the defense rested, Martin made a final request. He asked for permission to read a letter from the late Lieutenant Samuel Marston, addressed to James Archer, discovered among James's old belongings. The letter had been scanned and archived by the Army's record system, a relic James himself had forgotten in the swirl of post-war chaos. Judge Pruitt allowed it, though the prosecution objected that it was irrelevant. Martin stepped before the courtroom, holding the letter. "Your Honor, this letter from Lieutenant Marston to Sergeant Archer demonstrates the character of the defendant, shedding light on his sense of duty. It may help the jury understand his motivations." Judge Pruitt nodded, eyes cautious but open. Proceed. Martin read aloud. Sergeant Archer, if you're reading this, I hope it means you survived. I wanted to thank you for always having my back, for looking out for the younger guys in our unit who needed a steady hand. You were the one they trusted when times got darkest. Never forget that you have a purpose beyond this war. No matter what happens, keep fighting the good fight. You've got too big a heart to stop now. Lieutenant Samuel Marston. A hush fell over the courtroom. The words hung in the air, a testament to the bond forged in combat and the unwavering respect Sam held for James. James's eyes stung with tears he tried to blink away. He could see the jury shifting, some swallowing lumps in their throats. The letter seemed to pierce through the superficial lens of homeless ex-soldier and reveal the man beneath. The jury deliberated for hours. Each minute felt like a lifetime. James paced the courthouse corridor, anxiously rubbing the broken watch on his wrist. Dylan sat with a counselor, silent and tense. Martin drank cup after cup of black coffee, wearing a groove in the floor with his pacing. Finally, the bailiff called everyone back into the courtroom. The jury filed in, solemn. James's heart hammered. Judge Pruitt asked if they'd reached a verdict. The foreman stood, clearing his throat. We find the defendant, James Jonathan Archer, not guilty on all counts. An audible sigh of relief swept the room. James closed his eyes, tears slipping free. Martin clapped a hand on his shoulder. Dylan exhaled sharply, releasing a breath he'd been holding. Even the courtroom spectators, transfixed by the emotional weight of the trial, seemed moved. But before James could fully absorb the relief, an unexpected voice cut through the air. Your Honor, the state has new charges to bring, announced a different prosecutor who'd entered the room. Confusion rippled across the gallery. Judge Pruitt frowned. Explain. These minors who assaulted Dylan have come forward with a new statement. They claim that Mr. Archer threatened to retaliate against them unless they paid him off. They're accusing him of attempted extortion. A collective gasp escaped. Martin's face paled. James's jaw dropped. That's a lie, he cried. I never... The judge rapped the gavel. Order. Approach the bench. A hushed conversation ensued between the judge, the new prosecutor, and Martin. This new prosecutor insisted they had text messages from the bullies to their friends, claiming James was extorting them. It's clearly fabricated, Martin hissed. They're panicking because the court found James innocent. Judge Pruitt's brow furrowed. These allegations are suspiciously timed, but I need to review the evidence. For now, Mr. Archer is free to go. The state must file formal charges before we proceed. The shock lingered as the crowd dispersed. James felt whiplash. One moment cleared, the next overshadowed by a new storm. Outside the courthouse, Martin seethed. They're grasping at straws trying to protect those teens. We'll crush this. Don't worry. James's chest felt tight, anger and disbelief swirling. Could they never let him be free? Dylan stood nearby, tears in his eyes. I'm so sorry, Dylan whispered, voice trembling. They're just doing anything to hurt you. James knelt, gripping Dylan's shoulders gently. I'll handle it. It's not your fault, none of this is. But as James rose, a pair of angry eyes watched from across the plaza. A tall, lanky teenager with a bandaged arm, the one who'd wielded the knife. He glared at James and Dylan, then spat on the ground before slinking into the crowd. In the next weeks, the new charges simmered, but did not solidify. The teenagers who had tormented Dylan insisted on their extortion story, but Martin found no credible evidence of any such threat from James. The alleged text messages turned out to be group chats among the teens themselves, containing contradictory statements. While the legal front seemed to tilt in James's favor again, something else was brewing, something that would change the dynamic drastically. One afternoon, Martin received a frantic call from the police station. They want you to come in regarding those teens, he told James. Worried, they arrived at the station and met a detective who explained the situation. We have the bullies in custody, 2 of them including the boy with the knife. They robbed a liquor store last night. Security footage shows them brandishing the same knife. They also assaulted the cashier. James's stomach churned at the memory of that blade. So they've been arrested? Yes, the detective confirmed, eyes grim. Given that they're minors, their records were sealed, but this new felony changes things. We're building a case. They're the same ones who accused you of extortion. Martin exhaled. So their credibility is gone. This effectively kills the extortion claim. The detective nodded. We've informed the prosecution. They're dropping the new charges, not that they'd even filed them formally yet. And Mr. Archer, if you choose to pursue charges for your own assault, you can. James pursed his lips. He pictured Dylan, battered, homeless, terrified. He thought of the lies these kids told, the havoc they caused. Yet a strange weariness settled on him. Will that help Dylan in any way? He asked. The detective shrugged. They'll likely face trial for the liquor store robbery. The assault on you and Dylan can be included. That might ensure they face the consequences of their actions. James hesitated, a swirl of emotions in his chest. Part of him wanted justice, maybe even revenge for the hardship he'd endured. But he also recalled his training, the values Sam Marston had instilled. They're just kids, James muttered, remembering the fear and anger in that teen's eyes. But I'll do what I have to for Dylan's sake. Martin placed a reassuring hand on James's shoulder. We'll talk it over with Dylan's advocate. Figure out what's best. In the end, the unstoppable momentum of karma had caught up to these young aggressors. Their attempt to frame James had backfired, leading them into a more serious crime. Now, the law would deliver its own brand of reckoning. With the charges dismissed and the teens in custody, James Archer felt the weight of years lifting off his shoulders. For the first time since returning from Afghanistan, he sensed a genuine chance to rebuild his life. He continued therapy sessions with Dr. Newton, working through the nightmares and guilt. Each time he emerged feeling a bit stronger, more capable of facing the challenges ahead. At the shelter, he formed bonds with other veterans, including Carlos, who invited him to help with a new outreach initiative, distributing care packages to homeless veterans living under the overpasses. One crisp morning, James joined Carlos and a few volunteers in handing out blankets, hygiene kits, and food. He encountered men and women with vacant stares that once mirrored his own hopelessness. But now, he felt a calling, to help them the way Martin and others had helped him. As he offered a blanket to a trembling older woman, James saw the gratitude in her eyes, a spark of humanity amid the despair. It reminded him of the vow he'd made in Afghanistan, to make his survival mean something. On the legal front, Martin suggested James apply for a Veterans Assistance Program that provided job training and transitional housing. He vouched for James's integrity, citing the court case outcome and James's willingness to defend a vulnerable kid at great personal risk. It took time, but eventually James was accepted. He moved from the shared dorm at the shelter to a small studio apartment in a transitional housing complex. His bunk was replaced by a real bed, and he had a key of his own for the first time in years. Dylan, meanwhile, was placed in a foster home under the watchful supervision of the Youth Outreach Program. James visited often, checking on the boy's progress. Though Dylan struggled with trust issues, therapy and a stable environment helped him slowly heal. One day, Dylan showed James a drawing he'd been working on, a sketch of James in an army jacket, standing like a guardian angel in that fateful alley. James couldn't speak for a moment, the image cutting through his defenses. "It's how I remember it," Dylan said softly. "You saved me." James swallowed. "Thank you, Dylan. That means a lot." Word reached James that Judge Lawrence Marston wanted to meet him privately. Though Judge Marston had recused himself from the trial, he hadn't forgotten the homeless veteran who served under his son. They arranged to meet in the judge's chambers after official hours. James arrived, heart pounding. He found the judge alone, leaning on a dark wooden desk, staring at a framed photo of Lieutenant Sam Marston. "Mr. Archer," the judge said softly, turning to greet James, "I've been following your case. I was relieved to see you vindicated." James bowed his head respectfully. "Thank you, Your Honor." Judge Marston gestured for him to sit. "I've thought of Sam every day since we lost him. It's a wound that never truly heals. Knowing that you, one of his men, faced such hardships pains me. He believed in you, Mr. Archer. I'm proud to see you finally getting a fair shake." James's throat constricted, remembering his fallen lieutenant. Sam was the best man I knew. He deserved to come home too. Silence passed, heavy with regret and longing. Then Judge Marston said, "I've established a scholarship fund in Sam's name to help veterans pursue education or job training. I'd like you to be the first recipient." James's eyes widened. I don't know what to say." The judge offered a gentle smile. "Say you'll use it to honor Sam's memory." A swirl of emotions, gratitude, disbelief, determination swelled in James's chest. He thought of the darkest nights in Afghanistan, how Sam had kept their spirits up even when hope ran thin. This was a chance to keep that torch burning. "I will," James said, voice trembling. "I promise." In the months that followed, James enrolled in a vocational program specializing in HVAC maintenance. It was a far cry from the chaos of war, but something about fixing heating and cooling systems gave him a sense of tangible, constructive purpose. He learned the trade quickly, fueled by the memory of his fallen brothers and the people who believed in him. Sam, Judge Marston, Martin, Dr. Newton, and Dylan. Life took on a semblance of normalcy. His nightmares didn't vanish entirely, but they receded. Therapy helped him navigate the lingering trauma, and volunteer work at the shelter let him pay forward the compassion he'd received. Dylan thrived in his foster home, finally able to attend school without constant fear. The bullies who once terrorized him faced juvenile detention and a path toward rehabilitation. Their downfall was swift, a harsh lesson in the consequences of cruelty. One bright Saturday, James visited Dylan's foster family. The boy rushed out, a grin on his face. "James, I have something for you." He handed James a small envelope with a crisp card inside. On the front was a star, shining brightly above a silhouette of Chicago's skyline. Inside, a handwritten note. "Thank you for everything. You showed me there's still good in the world." James's vision blurred. He realized that in protecting Dylan, he'd found a part of himself he thought was lost. The soldier who once vowed to stand for what was right, no matter the cost. Months turned into a year. James completed his vocational program with honors. An HVAC company offered him a position, impressed by his work ethic and determination. He moved out of transitional housing into a modest one-bedroom apartment. One afternoon, as he was finishing an air conditioning repair at a local restaurant, he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to see Martin Fletcher, grinning ear to ear. "Look at you, Mr. 9 to 5, Martin teased. "How's it feel?" James chuckled. "Feels good, actually. Stable. New." Martin led him outside where a small group of people had gathered. Co-workers from the shelter, volunteers, and a few veterans James had befriended. They held a sign. "Congratulations, James Archer." Confetti popped, and James froze in astonishment. They'd organized a surprise celebration for him, commemorating his new job and the strides he'd made in recovery. Carlos rolled forward in his wheelchair, handing James a plaque. It read, "To James Archer, for proving that resilience, honor, and compassion can triumph over life's hardest trials." He stared at the words, his chest tight with emotion. He glanced around at the smiling faces, people who once saw him as just another homeless vet or a client. Now they saw him as a friend, an equal, and a beacon of hope. In that moment, the final pieces of James's broken spirit began to mend. He would never forget the darkness he emerged from. But now, the future stretched out before him, bright with promise. Today, James Archer's story stands as a testament to the power of resilience and kindness in a world often overshadowed by hardship. Once a homeless veteran on the brink of defeat, James found redemption in the unlikeliest of places, inside a courtroom, in a terrified young boy he saved, and in the heartfelt support of ordinary people who chose to believe in him. His transformation proves that no matter how dire our circumstances may seem, there's always a path forward if we hold on to hope and stand up for what's right. If you found James's journey moving, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. By spreading these stories of courage and compassion, you help others see that redemption is within reach, no matter where they stand. Let's keep shining light on hope, unity, and second chances for everyone. Thank you for watching.